In Activity 10, Adapting to Life in the Ocean, students learn about ways fish and marine mammals are adapted to life in the ocean. Students first model how a fish uses its swim bladder to control buoyancy and then demonstrate how marine mammals maintain a warm body temperature in cold water. Students also discover that blubber also helps marine mammals float. You will need the following materials from the kit. Activity Sheet 10, Parts A and B, 1-gallon plastic containers, 10-ounce plastic cups, glass eyedroppers, thermometers, shortening, and a spoon. You will also need to provide pencils, 2-liter plastic bottles with cap, 5-pound bag of ice cubes, roll of paper towels, and tap water. To prepare for Session 1, make 1 copy of Activity Sheet 10, Part A, for each student. Collect and rinse 2-liter plastic bottles with caps, 1 bottle per team of 4. Each team of 4 will need a 2-liter bottle with cap, an eyedropper, and some tap water. Make sure to have paper towels available in case of spills. To begin Session 1, begin a class discussion by asking, how does a fish control its buoyancy in water? Then ask, how do marine mammals stay warm in cold ocean water? Explain to the class that physical adaptations of the animals make them well suited to life in water. Then define adaptation as a physical structure or a behavior that enables an organism to survive in its environment. Distribute Activity Sheet 10, Part A, and instruct students to label the parts of the fish: the mouth, eye, gills, fins, scales, and tail. Bring students' attention to the oval-shaped structure inside the fish. Define the structure as the swim bladder, a balloon-like organ inside the fish that enables the fish to control its buoyancy, or the ability to float. Divide the class into teams of 4 and give each team a bottle filled to the very top with water. Make sure the cap is screwed on each bottle during distribution. Then distribute an eyedropper to each team and tell students to carefully remove the cap from the bottle of water, dip the tip of the eyedropper in the water, and gently squeeze and release the rubber bulb slowly to fill the eyedropper about halfway with water. When the eyedropper is half full, drop the eyedropper into the bottle of water and screw the bottle cap back on tight. Students should notice that the eyedropper should float at the top of the bottle. If the eyedropper sinks, inform students that there is too much water in the dropper. If this is the case, students will need to retrieve the droppers and start over. Instruct students to look at their setups. Ask students, what is inside the eyedropper? Students should respond that the eyedropper is partially filled with water. Then ask, what else besides water is inside the dropper? Guide students to understand that air is trapped inside the top half of the glass tube and inside the bulb. Then ask, what causes the dropper to float at the top of the bottle? Students should identify that the air inside keeps the dropper afloat. Next, have students hold their bottle in 2 hands, squeeze firmly, and then release. Ask, what happens to the dropper when you squeeze the bottle? Help students realize that when the bottle is squeezed, the dropper sinks. Squeeze the bottle again, but a little more gently this time. Ask, what happens to the dropper now? Students should respond that the dropper sinks, but not as much as before. Challenge students to try to make the eyedropper hover halfway down the bottle for at least 10 seconds. Make sure all students have an opportunity to squeeze the bottle. Encourage them to look carefully at the amount of air in the eyedropper as they squeeze the bottle and ask, does the volume of air in the dropper increase or decrease as you squeeze the bottle? Students should say that the volume of air in the dropper decreases as the bottle is squeezed. Explain to the class that when the bottle is squeezed, the air inside the eyedropper is compressed and takes up less space. This leaves more room inside the dropper for water. When more water enters the eyedropper, it becomes less buoyant and it sinks. Further explain that when the bottle is released, the air in the eyedropper expands back to its normal volume. Excess water is forced out, making the dropper more buoyant so that it floats to the top again. Inform the class that the fish's swim bladder works in the same way. The swim bladder is a balloon-like sac that is filled with a mixture of gases. To rise to the surface, the fish adds a small amount of air to their bladder. To dive, the fish releases a small amount of air from the bladder. And to hover, the fish keeps just the right amount of gases in their swim bladder. To conclude Session 1, instruct students to complete the activity sheet and then review their answers. To prepare for Session 2, make a copy of Activity Sheet 10, Part B, for each student. Fill plastic cups about half full with shortening, 1 cup per team of 4. Be sure to pack the shortening down in each cup. Each team of 4 will need a 1-gallon plastic container with cold water about an inch deep, a plastic cup of shortening, and a thermometer. You will need a spoon and a 5-pound bag of ice. Make sure to have paper towels available. To begin Session 2, ask students if they have ever gone swimming in very cold water. Students will likely say that getting into cold water was difficult or it hurt, and they became chilled after a short time. Explain to the class that the discomfort they felt was due to the difference in temperature between their warm bodies and the cold water. Further explain that all mammals, including humans, are warm-blooded. This means that their internal body temperature stays at a relatively constant level and does not change with the environment. The internal body temperature of cold-blooded animals, including fish, differs with changes in environmental temperature, such as the temperature of the surrounding water. Ask students, are whales fish or mammals? Students should know that whales are mammals and have an internal body temperature nearly as warm as humans, about 97 degrees Fahrenheit. Ask students, so how can a warm-blooded animal like a whale stay warm in cold ocean water? Accept all reasonable answers. Point out that in ice-cold water a human could not survive more than a few minutes. Next, divide the class into teams of 4. Distribute Activity Sheet 10, Part B, and the materials. Then add 6 to 8 ice cubes to each team's container to form a cold water habitat for this experiment. Give each team a thermometer and instruct students to record the room temperature on their activity sheets. Then have students place the thermometer in the cold water. Let it sit for about 3 minutes, then record the temperature of the water. Students should remove the thermometer from the cold water and give it a few minutes to warm back up to room temperature. Next, distribute the shortening to each team and tell students that the white, greasy substance in this cup is similar to blubber, the layer of fat under a whale's skin. Inform the class that in very large whales, the layer of blubber could be 2 feet thick. When students' thermometers have reached room temperature again, insert them halfway down into the center of the cup of shortening and place the cup in the ice water. Let the thermometer sit for 3 minutes and then record the temperature reading in the chart. Next, tell students to let the thermometer sit in the shortening for an additional 2 minutes and record the temperature again. Ask students, what advantage do you think this blubber provides a whale? Guide students to understand that blubber insulates the whale's body from the cold water. In this way, the warm-blooded whale can maintain its body temperature, regardless of the temperature of the water that surrounds it. Have students complete the activity sheet at this time. To conclude Session 2, explain that blubber has another helpful property. To demonstrate, have students scoop out some shortening and drop it into the container of water. They should see that it floats. Help students understand that blubber provides buoyancy for marine mammals because it is less dense than water. An animal with a thick layer of blubber can float more easily than an animal with a thin layer. Finally, inform students that in the next activity they are going to examine some skeletons left behind by some familiar and not so familiar sea creatures. For science background, reinforcement activities, curriculum connections, and information about the Delta Science Reader, please consult your DSM Teacher's Guide.